Welcome back for our third and final program celebrating Lunar or Chinese New Year from Weaverville, Joss House State Historic Park. Jack, what do we have in store for us for our final celebration?
Well, we are going to visit the inside of the temple again for some new stories that I hadn't touched on before. And we're also going to visit the Chinese Community Meeting Hall, which is right next to the temple. And we're also going to look at the living quarters for the Chinese caretaker. That caretaker's position and that living quarters were actually occupied up until 1947. And so it's a really, really wonderful part of this facility here. What I wanted to share with you now is this Chinese character. This Chinese character is called Fu, and it represents the Chinese character for fortune. These are printed by the thousands, and they're used all over China all year long to represent great fortune. But this time of year, at Chinese New Year's, you turn it upside down and you display it like this. And the reason for that is that the Chinese phrase for upside down means arriving. And so when you turn fortune, when you turn Fu upside down, it means that your fortune has arrived for the year. So that is a very, very favorable wish that all the Chinese have, is that your fortune has arrived. So this is not the only Fu. Let me turn it right side up. This is not the only Fu that's here in the temple. We are surrounded by 85 Fus, because Fu is also part of the word that uses to describe the bat. So here on the banners next to us, on the top of the first banner and the top of the fourth one to the left, there are large, very, very large cloth bats flying above the banner. They've got beautiful green eyes. They've got lots and lots of mirrors to provide protection. But the flying bat is another symbol for fortune. And then if you turn and come over to this side of the temple, and you look at the red board that goes between the pillars that are up here above us, they have carved flying bats and clouds into that red board, and they have painted the Fu, the flying bat, they have painted gold. And I could continue because I have actually found all 85. They're hidden everywhere. They are embroidered into the parade banners. They are carved onto all the fronts of the spirit houses and the offering tables. It was the #1 animal that was shared here in the temple. Now, the reason for having 85 of them here was to make sure that while you were here, maybe nowhere else than right here in the temple, you were always surrounded with good fortune. And having the walls and the ceilings and everything painted bright red, you are also surrounded with good luck. And as I said, the temple itself was for everyday use for the needs of the people, but there also was a community meeting hall. And it was at that meeting hall that the Chinese New Year's celebration and activities would always be set. So let's walk over and visit that now.
And you showed me this meeting hall, Jack, last time I was here, and there was something in here that I was really surprised to see that helped make a connection to one of our other California state parks, and we'll talk about in just a moment. I will tell you all that the temperature drops.
It does.
When you walk in here.
This is why this huge stove is here on this side. We are on the north side of the facility. It's always cold. The wood stove itself was purchased here locally in the 1850s, but it didn't provide enough heat. But the Chinese knew how to build catalytic converters. And so the round drum that was added into the flue pipe, it actually functions as a second heat source. It allows all of the smoke and the heat to slow down and be trapped inside that cylinder to add more heat to the room.
Wow, how crafty.
It is. It's a wonderful invention. And that way the elders could sit here on the benches and they could discuss the business of the community. They could discuss the activities that they supported here in the temple. And it was always recorded by a scribe, and those records were always put up on the wall as public notices. These are actually dated from 1918 back into the 1870s. And when we see these records and we see columns and rows of 3 Chinese characters printed on top of each other like they are here, these are individual names of Chinese who lived here in Weaverville, supported the temple, were part of this community. This Chinese character right here, his last name is Wong. The family name is always on the top. First name in the center, middle name at the bottom. And that created a lot of confusion for people because the caretaker here, his name was Lim Moon Lee. The family name was Lim. But because of the way his records were written down, the Lee got at the end, Moon Lim Lee. So everybody thought his last name was Lee, or in fact, his last name was Lim. And that happened quite a bit on Angel Island during the immigration years. And those problems really never were fixed for some people. These 2 wooden plaques that are up here above are very, very important to the history of this particular temple and the community. The long board was printed in 1878, and it's the names of all of the Chinese who were here in Weaverville still using the temple. And each person is represented by 3 Chinese characters printed vertically. And there are many, many typical Cantonese family names recorded. I would say Wong and Chin and Li and Lim are the #1 name, especially Wong. But the interesting thing about it is most of my Chinese visitors to the park, eventually, if they study that board, they do find their family name there. Now, as I said, the long board was printed in 1878. And then in 1882, the US Congress passed the Chinese Exclusion Act. And California adopted that new ruling and put all kinds of new regulations upon the Chinese who were here in California. They imposed heavy taxes on them. If they wanted to stay, they taxed the businesses unreasonably. Excuse me. And if you couldn't pay your taxes, you were arrested, sent to Angel Island, and deported back to China. And so many of the townspeople that felt, I'm an American now, I live here in California, I'm part of the United States, they didn't want to be deported back to the old country. So they found it was easier to leave Weaverville and go to the bigger cities where there were more Chinese and they could hide out and not worry about not being able to pay that tax on a monthly basis. So the result of that is the smaller board that's up above. And that was printed in 1908. And you can see there's a lot fewer names. That was the total population of the Chinese community of Weaverville in 1908. Wow. And so from a very, very large, very productive community in 1878 to just less than 100 in 1908.
I think I'm going to take a moment and I'm going to raise this camera up so you all can get a better perspective of what Jack just shared with us. So let's look at this long board here representing all of the names of the Chinese families that lived here in 1878, that contributed to the economy, that contributed to the success of the gold rush, that, you know, not necessarily in Weaverville, but in other areas of California, contributed to the building of the Transcontinental Railroad. And how many rows of names are on this long board? Am I counting correctly? 4 rows?
4 rows, yes.
And then let's go higher up and look at the row of names. There's only 2. And those names are the names of the families that were left in Weaverville 30 years later. And I'm going to just pull back because this is what really spoke to me when I was here last, is the visual representation of what Chinese exclusion looked like in California. And Chinese exclusion is part of our California history, and it's often a lesser known story and maybe at times an untold story. And here in California state parks, we're recognizing our need to continue to tell these untold stories, and to talk about how actions that were taken in the past were very harmful on various populations. And we do have a ports program that actually talks about the Chinese Exclusion Act and talks about the effect that the Chinese Exclusion Act had on Chinese immigrants trying to come into the United States through Angel Island. So for more information on that, you can visit our website, ports-ca.us, for the Angel Island Ports Program, where the Chinese were detained. But it is, often we're aware of this difficult history, but we don't get a chance to see it. Right. And to see what happened in just 30 short years because of a racist law.
Exactly. And that law was passed in 1882, and it wasn't repealed until 1943.
Wow.
And it was repealed basically because Madam Chiang Kai-shek, while addressing Congress in Washington, D.C., shamed the congressman into the fact that she was basically illegally in the United States because she had not entered properly following the rules of the Chinese Exclusion Act. Hmm. We have many, many things here that are wonderful pieces of history. And fortunately, a few years ago, we had the opportunity to have everything interpreted by Professor Egan at San Francisco State College. And this is very, very important. We've now had this replicated so that it is actually a lot clearer. This is actually the duty statement of the caretaker to taking care of the temple for a whole year. All of the statues that are inside the temple, their names are recorded on this. The date of their birthday celebration is also recorded. It tells you how many firecrackers should be lit every morning.
Oh, that's your favorite part.
That's my favorite part. We'll be doing that in a little bit. But the really interesting thing about this is that the history is here. It is a foreign language. I have only learned to read a few Chinese characters. My Chinese teacher said I'm very, very good at recognizing the characters that are on Chinese menus. But there are hundreds and hundreds of characters that you have to memorize to be able to read this. Right behind us here on the wall is a very large piece of white paper that was printed by the Chinese caretaker. And these are more of the morals and ethics that he was trying to get people to remember, so that they had a better chance of fulfilling their personal obligations, their lifetime obligations, and their personal responsibilities. So one of them that all of the Chinese elders who visit here have fun with is the one that starts right here in this column, and then it comes all the way down here to this two characters at the bottom. And I've had Chinese grandmothers look at this and they say, oh, read this. I didn't write this one. There it is. And so what it basically says is that even though you don't understand your mother and father at this age, when you get married and have children of your own, you will then understand. There's another one up here that I really like. It says that you have to be very careful of what you let in your ear, because it can cause you a lot of trouble if you let it fall back out of your mouth at the wrong time. Hmm. So it is a lesson of, you may hear something, but it's your responsibility not to repeat it. It's called gossip, because it might not be the truth. And this was written by Lim Soo-Kien many, many years ago. And he lived here in this small living quarters when he was caretaker of the temple. And this is the way it was in 1956 when The temple was gifted to the California State Parks by Moon and Dorothy Lee, and it's been maintained kind of in a suspended setting, basically the way it was when we first received it, just to remind people of the living conditions of the Chinese. Now, he had a very, very important position being the caretaker of the temple, but he had learned as caretaker not to show off, not to put on a lot of value in possessions or things that you had. So it's very, very simple, but it did take care of all of his needs. There's a little cooking stove, there's a bed to sleep on, a hat on the bed for when it's raining, and up at the far end of the bed is a wooden pillow to rest your head on.
I'm going to see if this cell reception will let us get all the way over there, because that is not like the pillows that we think of today. A wooden block. And I think it speaks to the resilience.
It does, yes.
Of people that came to California for their dream.
It was, and that was their dream, was that they could come to Gold Mountain and their life would be better. There'd be better prosperity. I have talked to the descendants of many families that had ancestors that lived here in those early days. And the one thing that I keep hearing time and time again was they didn't put a whole lot of importance on possessions, like here in the living quarters, but if they had a family and they had children, the emphasis was in education for the children. And that's always been very, very important. So we'll leave the meeting hall and go back into the temple. And one of the duties of the caretaker, especially at Chinese New Year's, was to provide a yearly fortune. And so here it is in this little basket. This was written by the same man that wrote that message on that white paper inside the caretaker's quarters. This particular fortune was chosen this year by the current caretaker, and she thought it was a very, very favorable year. This year, the year of the metal ox, is supposed to be a very favorable year for those who work hard and are steadfast and committed to what they're doing this year.
I like that.
Yeah. And so these two golden flowers, they're getting very, very difficult to find. They used to be more plentiful in the 1980s and 90s. These golden flowers have here a little boy and a little girl, and there are two peacock feathers. There are also hundreds of the old ones that are still here in the temple from those early days. And the golden flower is put in the temple as a dedication to all future descendants of your family, the two children, but these are the eyes of your ancestors who are looking down upon you while you are here. And so if you purchase one of these and you place them in the temple, you are dedicating all future relatives and all past ancestors to this particular temple.
You know, if anyone's watching and they're just tuning in to these broadcasts, we've had two previous broadcasts before, and we are in Weaverville, Joss House State Historic Park, the oldest continuously used Chinese temple in California. And in our first broadcast, Jack spoke about a lot of the symbolism that you find in here, symbolism like that we just learned about. And it's really quite beautiful, Jack.
It is.
And so pertinent today.
It is. These are the old ancient golden flowers that have been here for many, many years. The remnants of the little boy and the little girl and the peacock feathers above. These are still produced, but as I said, they're getting very, very hard to find. We've had a lot of families that see these and they see some of the new ones. So I'm always directing them to one specific shop in Sacramento that still sells them.
Mm.
This is also very important. This is a very, very unique form of artwork. It is a painting that was painted on the back of a glass panel. So it's called Chinese reverse painting. The artist had to paint the image in reverse. So if the Emperor of China had a beard, then the beard has to go on the glass before you actually paint the face. But before you get to paint the face, you have to put in the eyes and the eyebrows. And you work all the way back to the sky in the back. Whereas if you're using a canvas or a piece of wood to paint on, you start with the sky and you work your way up to the beard and the eyes and the eyebrows. These three men are the three things that all Chinese men strive for during their lifetime. From left to right, they are known as Fu Lu Sao, fortune, luck, and long life. And the old man on the right side that represents long life, he's holding a green jade bowl with a peach. And there are many, many images of peaches here inside the temple, and they are symbols of longevity. The one thing that you will not find here in the temple is a pear, a green pear. And that's because the word for green pear is the same as cut or separate or divide. And at the beginning of Chinese New Year's, you do not want to separate. You want to be together. So I had to get used to all of these old traditions and these things. Because green apples, if you couldn't find green apples, I thought it would be perfectly fine to bring in green pears. But I didn't understand that rule about separation.
And how did you educate yourself to become more aware of these cultural traditions so that you could show them respect while being a caretaker for California state parks of this temple?
I had studied in university. I've been involved with cultural, history for many, many years. But the one thing I found was take the time to listen to the people from this culture. Listen to people from all cultures. You'll learn something. I actually got in trouble when I went to a funeral in San Francisco for a Taoist priest. And at the cemetery, I noticed something that really surprised me. And so I said to one of the people there, I said, "This looks like it's Jewish." And they said, "Well, yes, it is, but it's also Taoist." And then she looked at me and she goes, "And don't ask me which one started it first." So there are a lot of similarities, between cultures here that are represented here. And when I became more aware of those things, I started noticing them other places also.
And I love how you had mentioned in the beginning, the first broadcast, that you have been working here since 1998. So we're coming on 22 years,
Right.
And that you had a chance to spend time with the elders and to speak with people who have called this temple their worship center.
Yes.
It's been a part of them for many, many, many years.
Many years and many generations. And the one thing that I'm sad about is that the next generation, or the second generation, as I refer to it, your grandchildren, there's not as much interest in this old culture as the grandparents had. There's a lot here to learn. It is difficult because the language changed in the 1960s during the Cultural Revolution. All of these messages that are on these cloth banners and on these wooden plaques, these are done in the old classic form of Chinese calligraphy. And yet today in China, the schools are only teaching the new simplified version. So I have a lot of very well-educated young Chinese visitors, and they see characters here that are totally foreign to them. They've never seen them before. But that's just part of the Cultural Revolution.
Well, and it is hopes too, that as we continue to make this information more accessible,
Yes.
right? To make, in our case, to make this park accessible to all of you today, to give all of you an opportunity to experience this beautiful place and the culture that it embodies and symbolizes, that we're helping to continue to keep that alive.
Yes, and that's one of the things that the California state parks have been dedicated to for many, many years, is to not only provide protection for our natural resources here in California, but also the protection of the cultural resources. Not just protection, but interpretation and education also. Mm-hmm. And I really, really enjoy being part of that.
There was something, and I don't know if this is where you're going next, but speaking of interpretation and talking about the power of culture and the difference, looking at the differences in culture, are we going towards this piece that you told me a story about the last time I was here, and maybe a target practice?
Yes, that's where I'm headed. This large stand holds the temple gong and the temple gong and the temple drum. So the drum is up here on the top. It is a large kettle drum. It has a piece of cowhide stretched on the face of it. And it has been used now for almost 150 years, this one. And it has a very, very unique design painted on it. If you look very closely, there's a dragon on the right-hand side, and on the left-hand side, there is a phoenix bird. And between the two of them, surrounded by flames, is the round red pearl of wisdom, which both of them, it's centered, balanced between the two. So this particular image in the old art form, the dragon is yang and the phoenix bird is yin. And so this is the old original symbol that represented yin and yang, that balance between two equal sides, but that have opposite personalities. Some people say one is good, one is bad, one is light, one is dark, one is male, one is female. If you get discussing this particular bit of history with the old grandmas or the aunties, you can get yourself in big trouble right away.
And I wanted to actually, I'm stepping back a little bit so everyone can get a sense of scale for how big this is. Jack's a pretty tall man. And so what would you say, about 11 feet tall or so?
11 feet total. And the gong itself fools a lot of people because it looks like it's just hanging on a string, but it's actually on a braided metal cord. And I know from past experience that it weighs 212 pounds.
Wow.
It is solid cast bronze. It was made in Canton, China, in a foundry that still exists today. But this particular gong has a sad history. When it was produced, it is a cloud gong, and it's because it was going into the cloud forest temple. And so when you look at the clouds, they are above us, and with the clouds, you have the moon and the sun. And that's the two Chinese characters that are here still in the round circles.
You know what I might do? How about let's trade positions, and I'm going to come so I can get a little closer.
Okay.
And then I'll trade spots with you.
All right.
See if I can get out of the light and give everybody a better perspective.
So the drum and the gong were used every day here in the temple. If you had come and it was Chinese New Year's, or you had come on another day and you had left an offering as a tribute to the historic ancestors, or you had petitioned them to help you with a new problem, they have to be aware of that intent. And so there's a specific pattern that was used in striking the drum and the gong together to create the heartbeat of this temple. And that became a problem after the 1890s, because these two pieces were also taken out into the community on Chinese New Year's Day and on other very auspicious occasions for a huge parade. And they'd carry the gong on a long shoulder pole, and they would use a mallet to strike it, to make noise. There's also quite a few gongs and cymbals that went along with it. If you were here for the first program, you heard me ring in the celebration with the round gong. But unfortunately, one year in the late 1890s, one of the town's citizens decided that it would be great fun to shoot the gong with his revolver. And so the round circle at the bottom is missing its Chinese character. And we know from research that the character that's missing where the bullet holes are was the character for Earth that sits below the sun and the moon. And so in the old records, we found that the Chinese caretaker discussed this problem with the Chinese elders, and they all agreed that man destroyed the earth.
Wow. And if you all can see, what I'm trying to focus in on is that hole in the middle of the circle, and one below it are two bullet holes.
Yeah. So
right through the middle of the symbol of Earth.
Earth, yeah. So the Chinese said that the man that did this, he did not have control of his three personal responsibilities. And that was to do no harm with your actions, to do no harm with your thoughts, and especially to do no harm with your speech. So the harm that he did here was with his actions. He thought something, he carried it out, and it was wrong. So Moon Lim Lee, who was the caretaker from 1937 until 1956, when he gave the temple to the people of California, he was very, very well liked here in Weaverville. A great businessman. He ran a lot of his businesses on credit to help those who couldn't always have the cash to pay right away. He was so well known here in Northern California in those early years that Governor Ronald Reagan assigned him as the California State Highway Commissioner for 14 years. And we have California rest stops thanks to Moon. And that was part of his personal life obligations. He had almost total control of his personal responsibilities, although his wife sometimes would say his speech needed work. Mine does all the time, so I know what she was talking about. But the lifetime obligations were to take the time and the effort to learn who you are, to learn your history, to learn your culture, to learn from the past. Because otherwise, if you don't learn it, you could repeat it or have to go through it again. And it's better to know the good and the bad, the yin and the yang, so that you can follow the path to the good and avoid the bad. But then during your lifetime, you have an obligation to the present. And so his obligation to this temple in the present was to be the caretaker. And he did that for over 50 years. Once it became a state park, he became the president of our nonprofit cooperating association that has been helping this park for many, many years. And then those efforts that he did was helping take care of the very last personal obligation that you have, your lifetime obligation, and that is to provide for the future generations. So through his efforts, we still have these things here. People are still enjoying them today. Families are still using the temple the way it always has been used. And so today on Chinese New Year's, if we were really actually open and families were here, last year we had almost 500 people here, so it was very, very crowded. The last thing that would be done by the caretaker or by an individual that can read Chinese is to read the prayer that's on that little red card, which is actually calling upon all 13 of the ancestors honored here at the Cloud Forest Temple, telling them that they have been honored during Chinese New Year's, that they have been remembered, that their past has not been forgotten. And once that prayer is recited, then the caretaker would take the mallet and this little wooden stick, and this has been used for many, many years. This was shown to me by Carol Lynn Lee, Moon's daughter, and her daughter and her grandson still have done this. They've done that. They've done this particular procedure this year, and I asked for permission to be able to do it today for you, so that when we close out this celebration, I'm going to strike the drum and the gong in the specific pattern for this temple. It creates what's called the tone or the heartbeat of this temple. And the hope is that when you do this correctly, everyone from the past will hear this, their spirit will hear this, and they'll know that the temple is still functioning. It hasn't been overlooked or forgotten. So I'll try my best to get this down right. The favored number is 9, and things are done in multiples of 3. So you'll hear it as I do this. So I'm very, very honored to be able to do that this year. I'm hoping that next year we'll actually have the family here to be able to do that for everyone. So the last thing that is done is an attempt to rid the world, not just the temple or the temple grounds, but to rid the whole world of evil that built up during the year of the rat. And we know the evil that built up that we've been dealing with, over this last year. So I'm going to go outside and I'm going to light the traditional firecrackers, because the belief is that evil spirits have extremely sensitive hearing, and they use that hearing to try to find the people who are dishonest, because they can hear their thoughts and they listen to their speech, and it's always not the same. So to prevent evil from influencing people and causing problems within the community or within the whole world, loud noises are always part of a celebration. During the lion dance, you'll hear lots and lots of noise, the drums, the gongs, and the cymbals. If there was a parade, you'll hear all of that noise. You'll hear lots and lots of firecrackers. There are several animals that are considered really, really good at getting rid of evil spirits. One are bluebirds, because they have the color of heaven and they are loud and obnoxious. The other are little tiny food dogs that bark consistently, just bark, 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 bark. So that irritates evil spirits. So a lot of Chinese families, they have those little food dogs as pets. So if you'd like to follow me out, we're going to go out to the front of the temple and light the firecrackers.
And as we follow you, Jack,
yes,
I am absorbing all of this and all of your wisdom and your information, and thinking about all of the symbolism that we've seen and learned about today, and thinking about the fact that evil doesn't like mirrors, and that we're sending the evil of last year out, and that we have 3 responsibilities: to basically speak no evil, do no evil, and think no evil.
Yeah, exactly.
And we've all come through a very difficult year. Mm-hmm. And we've come through a difficult year that was full of tragedy and social unrest and social injustice, and we've just learned about how this new year helps us honor the past so that we don't make mistakes again.
Mm-hmm, exactly.
I want to thank you so much for giving us an opportunity to see through the symbolism provided here at Joss House. Some pretty important life lessons that we can walk away from this beautiful ceremony with.
And one that I just noticed myself, and it's kind of overlooked today. There are many, many symbols here that you see. They're very, very beautiful, but then there are some that are very subtle. And if I lift up this prayer, this red paper, if you look at the front of the table, you see all of the scratch marks that are right there in the front.
Mm-hmm.
And this was something that Moon Lee pointed out to some of our early California State Park employees working here. He said, don't think that you're going to do us any good to repaint that table because of all those scratch marks on the front. He said, leave it alone. And then he explained how that occurred. Those are marks that were made by thousands of wood stick matches being dragged across the face of the table to light the incense and the candles. Mm. So something as simple as a scratch mark on a table, it's actually now part of history.
Well, and that idea of don't paint over history,
right?
Because we can learn by looking back, even if looking back is painful. We need to look back in order to be able to move forward. Okay, and we are exiting the Weaverville, well, the Temple of the Forest Beneath the Clouds. Did I say that correctly? And we are gonna wipe away those evil spirits with Jack's favorite part. And Jack, where would you like me? Where shall I be?
Go out here. I'm going to throw these right out onto the lawn.
Okay. So we've obviously taken all necessary precautions for these firecrackers. Oh, that was wonderful. Well, with that, we would like to wish you a very happy Chinese New Year, Lunar New Year. And here is to 2021, the year of the metal ox. And thank you so much for joining us. If you would like to watch a recording of any of these broadcasts, they will be on our California State Parks Facebook page. We will also upload them onto our Ports Program YouTube channel to share with students across California and beyond. And we hope you'll come and visit one day. Jack is a pretty amazing tour guide, as I think you've all had a chance to experience. So with that, I will turn the camera around briefly, wave goodbye. Thank you for joining. And I'm going to turn the camera back around. So Jack, you could have a chance to wave.
Oh, Gung Hei Fa Choi! Gung Hei Fa Choi!
Gung Hei Feng Choi.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining.